welcome back to another episode of Behind the Lens. I'm Debbie Elias, film critic, creator, and host of Behind the Lens, where every week we go behind the lens and below the line with directors, talents, screenwriters, composers, you name it, talking about film, TV, and even stage and music music as well. So today, but every week, you can find me in print and online in the U.S. and abroad, and always at behindthelensonline.net. But it's Monday. It's 11 o'clock Pacific. It's 2 o'clock Eastern time, and we're right here on adrenalineradio.com. And hey, for those of you, don't forget, you can also find the show, the podcast of our live broadcast on iTunes, on Stitcher, obviously on behindthelensonline.net, on indiepopcorn.fm, and a few other places. I think Spreaker has us as well. I'm not sure. We're in a bunch of different places. So check us out. And of course, because our radio station owner, Nick Federoff, loves live stream, if you are listening and you want to watch on Facebook, you can go to the adrenalineradio.com Facebook page and you can watch the live stream of this show. And if you do that, you will see all the really cool Han Solo merchandise that is hitting the stores now in anticipation of Solo, a Star Wars story, which is in theaters on the 25th. And embargo lifts tomorrow for reviews, but I can tell you, you're going to love it. It fits the Star Wars canon beautifully. And go see it because it is a hell of a lot of fun. But very, very cool merchandising, I have to say. They have Han Solo tote bags, Solo t-shirts. Of course, any true Han Solo fan will recognize little gold dice, which you will also recall played a very important part in a key scene in The Last Jedi. So get ready, get your tickets now. And then check and then go look for the merchandise. And of course, don't forget the #1 movie in the world, Avengers Infinity War. It's still out there, and there's plenty of Infinity War merchandise out there as well. So there. No, Disney does not pay me. They should for all the plugs I give them, though. Today we've got a great show today. Some guests that I'm really excited to talk to. Coming up at the quarter-hour mark, we're going to have writer, director of photography, editor DOMINIC GILL is going to be joining us, along with, I do believe, co-writer and producer NADIA GILL, and possibly the subject of the documentary Coming to My Senses, Aaron Baker. I've had so many different emails going back and forth. I'm not sure if all three are joining us or just two of them, but we're ready for them, and it's a very empowering story. It's a fascinating story. It's Aaron's story. Aaron was injured in a motocross accident almost 2 decades ago and was left a quadriplegic. This documentary, Coming to My Senses, is about his journey back and conquering the impossible to actually walk unassisted across Death Valley. Dominic has done a beautiful job with the visuals. The story is extremely compelling. And Aaron is one of the most likable guys that you could ever hope to see on camera in a documentary. So we're going to talk to Dominic and company at the quarter-hour mark. The half-hour mark, fascinating film. It's called The Little Pink House. Writer, director Courtney Balaker will be with us, along with producer Ted Balaker. True story. But this is a narrative form of the true story. This actually, the story of the Little Pink House played out in the legal system. It started with a woman, Suzette Kilo, who found a place she wanted to live, settled down, painted it pink, found a guy she was crazy about, married him, and big business, Pfizer company, wanted to come in and take over the land, and the city enacted Eminent Domain. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and when it did, it sent shell-shocked the legal world. and every town in America and every homeowner, because it basically took away a lot of the protections that homeowners had when eminent domain is attempted to be exercised. This is Suzette's story. It takes us all the way through the Supreme Court hearing. It stars Catherine Keener. It's exceedingly well done, but it's very, very interesting, and you get a sense of how long it takes, the legal journey and the emotional journey you then are forced to endure when you embark on battling an issue like this with governmental entities, the courts, and all the way up to the Supremes. So I'm very anxious to talk to Courtney about this one. But right now, we've got part of half. For time purposes, we got half of our exclusive interview with Mark Raso, director of Kodachrome. Kodachrome is still out in limited release in theaters. It will be popping up on digital VOD. It may already be there. I'm not sure. It is actually the story of a photographer who is dying, only uses Kodachrome film, and there's only one lab left that processes Kodachrome film. And 2010 is when this went down. It was anybody in photography or film or cinema was apoplectic over this, the shutting down of the last Kodachrome developing lab in the country. It became the subject of an article and finally found its way into the hands of writer Jonathan Tropper and then into the hands of director Mark Raso as we tell the story of this photographer who is a real photographer. You've seen many of his photos in Nat Geo and in other places. It's a man who's living in an analog world that is very rapidly going digital. Stars Ed Harris, Jason Sudekis, Elizabeth Olsen, Dennis Haysbert. Absolutely stunning film, and it is beautiful, and it is shot on film. But take a listen to my interview with Mark Raso as we talk about Kodachrome. I have to congratulate you on a beautiful, beautiful film, visually and emotionally. This whole film, from start to finish, I love the inspiration for it. I was a huge fan of Kodachrome myself, so I died 1,000 deaths in 2010. How did this project come to you? And then, because we've got the great allegory here, but we cannot escape the fact that we are talking about Kodachrome, a very visual medium with the truth that comes out in the true colors and the lighting, which you and Alan just have exquisitely explored with your visual tonal bandwidth here. So I'm curious how the film came to you, and then how you and Alan then approached this cinematographically to design the film.
Sure. So the film came to me, I mean, the script was sent to me as a new father. At the time, my son was 6 months old, and we had recently moved to Los Angeles for career reasons, and kind of grappling with this, your artwork versus family thing. So when I read the script, I instantaneously took to it, and, happened to be reading it with my son in my arms late at night, 3 in the morning, after he wouldn't go back down to bed. So just started crying when I got to a certain scene in the film. I kind of knew I had to do this film, and that's what brought me to it. And once I got on board, I really kind of, you try to find a spine in the film. You try to find themes that can carry you through, and it was this idea that both, along with the death of film and the death of the Ben character, there was also like Matt's character, Jason's character, was in this place where the music industry was moving from basically from analog to digital, and kind of like what this means in society and this time period that we're going through. So that's what really drew me to the film as well. This idea of moving forward and how do we, character-wise, it's like I felt like, well, in order to move forward, we kind of have to let go of the past. But it's a perfect metaphor for like, in terms of what we're of photography and music and stuff. Like we don't want to let go of the past. We don't. A lot of us don't want to let go of the past. We don't want to move forward. And do we have to do it? Do we? It's this dilemma we find ourselves in. So that was really kind of the through line and what we wanted to focus on. And so visually, when me and Alan sat down, a lot of our initial discussions were based on reflection, like this reflective moment, and how we can bring reflections into the film.
I have to say, Mark, you and Alan make the greatest use of windows and mirrors for that very purpose of reflection and duality and two worlds existing within one. And it is so exquisitely done. So I applaud you on that.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, that was one of the things we started off on. Also, we had this idea to introduce all the characters through a pane of glass. So that's kind of how we intro them all through this pane of glass. So again, like one to kind of mimic the way Ben sees the world.
Mm-hmm.
He has to put this thing in front of us, but also, just to kind of show that nobody's. When we start this film, there's no clarity involved with these characters. They're all kind of struggling. They're all kind of obscured with where they are in their life. So these were like these visual themes. Those were the ones that we were able to carry through the film. Another one we tried to do was to put Matt's character in frames,
mm-hmm.
So to speak, in window frames and door frames, or at best, as much as we could, try to stay tight, almost like he's trapped in the photo himself throughout
mm-hmm.
this whole film. So we stayed extremely tight on him. We really wanted to restrict him and put borders and frames on him, representing Ben's photography and what that does, and then allow that to open up at the end once they kind of connect. We're as wide as we ever are with him. We see more sky behind him. We let him journey in the frame in these wider shots. So that something like that was a little bit tricky to navigate. And the final thing we did, which was the most complicated thing, was we thought, and I might be going on a little bit of a tangent here, but hopefully this will all kind of come together in some way.
Mark, I love this tangent. Keep going.
Okay. We decided that we didn't want to have Matt and Ben alone in a kind of clean two-shot until they've connected. So
mm-hmm.
we kept them separate the whole film. Sometimes they're together in the same frame, but Lizzie's character would always be in it with them,
mm-hmm.
with them. So it would be the three of them. But just the two of them, we wanted to keep them separate to kind of visually put a stamp on this idea that they are so disconnected. They're so disconnected. We don't even want them in the same frame together. And it got tricky on us when we were shooting a lot of the car scenes because we ended up having to be really tight, a little bit tighter than we might maybe wanted to be. But once you kind of see through this vision, it goes. But then I really feel like it pays off once they are together at the end, once they're on this road trip and they're together in Kansas, and you see them together a lot for the last 15 minutes
mm-hmm.
of the film that Ben's in. You really get this sense that they've connected, and I think we're trying to work on a kind of subliminal level here, but we think that's something that pays off. So those are kind of the tools we use to attack. It's good to always have some sort of guidelines to attack the film.
Mm-hmm.
another thing we did was we tried to replicate, as much as they are separate and not seen to kind of together, we also wanted to shoot similar shots to kind of convey this idea that they are father-son. They have the same traits. They are, there is bloodline. So we oddly enough, I mean, we looked at tons of photography books. We looked at tons and tons of photography books and tried to get inspiration. But one place we found inspiration was from a painter, Alex Colville. And because he has these really interesting shots, and often people's faces are obscured and it's on their backs. And we kind of really liked, the subtext in the painting. So we tried to, have this shot of Matt looking out the window, and then later replicate it later in the film of Ben looking out the window, and have, push in on Matt's back and push in on Ben's back, and this kind of idea that these two characters, connect them that way, connect them visually through these shots. So that's kind of that was our big blueprint, overall blueprint for the film.
Well, I have to tell you, your blueprint worked to a T. It is perfection. I mean, I love how you mentioned the frames because, when we first see them together when they're going to embark on the road trip and Matt's sitting on the stoop, what do we have there? We've got all these oversized old broken picture frames there. Which I thought was a beautiful, I chuckled when I saw that because I figured I knew with the character of Ben seeing everything through a lens, there would be a lot of framing, and you didn't disappoint me. I'm so happy you had a convertible because I can just imagine as much difficulty as you had with getting shots, individual separate shots in the convertible, you would have died trying to do it in an enclosed car.
No, I know. It was a little bit of a tricky one. The car stuff is always.
And that is just a bit of my interview with Mark Raso on Coming to My Senses. If we have time later in today's show, you'll hear more of that. I'd say you'll hear more of it next week, but next week you're going to hear about Han Solo. So, but right now you want to bring them live, Pam? We're gonna jump ship here, and we're gonna move over to our very special guests, DOMINIC GILL and NADIA GILL. Hi, guys.
Hi,
hey,
how are you today?
It is going fine. How is it going with you?
It's good. It's a cloudy day here in Los Angeles, but that's a welcome change.
I like the cloudy days. I have to admit, I do like the cloudy days. Cloudy, but not rain if I'm driving on the freeway.
Right, exactly.
Well, I have to congratulate you guys on this documentary, Coming to My Senses. It is, number one, Aaron Baker's story is so compelling, and it is so fascinating that what sheer will and determination can do. But to see it unfold through the eye of your lens, DOMINIC, the visuals, that whole trek through Death Valley, your visuals and your editing, it is a feast for the eyes to watch your cinematography as this story unfolds. Really, really beautifully done.
Thank you so much.
I'm curious, how did the two of you connect with Aaron? At the top of the show, I filled the listeners in. He was involved in a motocross accident almost 2 decades ago, was a quadriplegic, and has willed himself back to the point of being able to walk across 20 miles of Death Valley. This is not the kind of story that this is the kind you have to either look for or luck just puts it in your lap. So I'm curious how it came to the two of you.
Well, it's actually a little bit of both, and it has to do with a previous project that Dom and I were working on, where we were going to take a specially designed tandem bicycle with several people with disabilities across the United States of America for a cycling adventure.
Mm-hmm.
And in looking for people to go on that adventure, we had been referred to Aaron Baker. And when we talked to him, he was already, you know, much further advanced in his recovery and his ability to actually pedal his own way across the state. He'd in fact done it twice. And so even though he wasn't a good fit for that project, he'd always been, he's a really charismatic and supportive guy. And he basically came out to the departure for our trip and rode us out of town and gave us pointers. And from then on, we kind of just stayed friends. And it was a couple of years later that Dominic turned to me and he said, you know, I've always been in love with Aaron's story, and I'd really love to, film some of it and put it out into the world for people to see.
Well, I'm glad that you decided that you wanted to do that, Dom. Because this is, I spent a number of years working with a preeminent attorney in the disabled community, and her group, Ralph's Riders, which is all spinal cord injury patients. And so I've seen firsthand what sheer will and determination can do, and also the resilience that, as I've always said, you know, rather than these people, instead of being disabled, they are more able than most of us. And you telling Aaron's story just solidifies that for me and proves it tenfold. But now, how did you, hooking up with Aaron, because developing your through line here, obviously you've got the 20-mile trek across Death Valley, but you've got to establish your through line leading up. You didn't want to make it maudlin of, a quad laying in a bed for the first part of the film.
Right.
But luckily, Aaron loved getting in front of the camera and shooting things his entire life. So you had a treasure trove of family home movies to insert. So how do you start breaking that down and then interweave and intercut Death Valley, because you go back and forth on the journey for us?
Yeah. From the get-go, I realized, this actually stems, it's interesting to say that this stems out of an initial thought of actually just making a short film about the desert crossing. Mm-hmm. I'd made a 5-minute short film about the sort of a 20,000-foot view of Aaron's recovery, and it had been very successful actually in film festivals, and that made me think we should make something more. At which point the desert, the traverse of Death Valley came into our heads, and we shot it, and it's not a normal way of sort of feature-length documentary planning, I think. But shortly before going into post on that, we thought maybe we had a lot more to play with. And the more we looked at his recovery story, the more we realized, or the more I became set on doing a non-linear structure, so that the desert walk was interspersed throughout. Because as you correctly point out, having this chronological thing of Aaron's accident and then painstakingly slowly moving through and having essentially the sort of visual eye candy all in the last 20 minutes, people might not get there. Right. Or as powerful as archive footage is, unless it's used judiciously, it can wear on you. So, that's really how the structure came about. We thought it was a really good, sometimes metaphorical and sometimes not, way to keep the film alive at certain stages.
Well, and that's something that I really loved, as you are cutting back and forth once we really, with the trek across Death Valley, is because we are constantly reminded, on the one hand, you've got these beautiful long shots, widescreen, and we really can capture the desolation and the aloneness of this journey that Aaron is making. But we see him there walking step by step. Nobody's holding him up. Mm-hmm. He's walking. But then you cut back to various stages of either his pre-accident or post-accident, with the various stages of recovery and in regaining his mobility. And you keep us you just shake your head. And every time you go back to a desert shot, you're shaking your head. It's like, this is unbelievable. And that's a very, very powerful thing to implant in someone's mind when they're watching something.
Yeah, and I'm grateful that you recognize these things, because certainly I think, as you state, basically the desert we chose partly because of Erin's ability meant that walking on flat surfaces made things, almost possible as opposed to impossible. So that was one reason we chose Death Valley. But maybe from a creative perspective, what better landscape is there to really polarize and focus the eye on what is going on in that image? As beautiful as the desert is, it's not distracting, it's actually focusing.
Right. Oh, very much so, because even though you've got the textures and the camera, you capture the texture of the ground so that we really get an added sensory experience of what he is actually going through as he's trying to walk on the various textures. And that intrigued me watching that. It really intrigued me to see that. I'm curious, Nadia, because, you were writing a lot of this, and when did the idea of interviews come into play with a couple of the doctors? Obviously, brilliant therapist at core, and then of course Erin's mother, and ultimately his fiance. How did the interviews come into play here?
Well, I think when we first started making the film, we actually did the production first for the Death Valley Walk, and then we started sorting through the archive footage, and I think at some point we said to ourselves, like, who's holding the information that we need? Basically you decide what argument are you prosecuting, or what story are you telling, and you just start thinking, who are the credible people who have the experience or the knowledge with which to portray the events as they happened. And, the obvious people, the most obvious person was Erin's mom and his dad and his sister. And so we kind of started with the immediate family. And then we worked out a rung from there and went to his therapist, who he'd spent the longest part of his journey with. And then we really had to chase down Erin's neurosurgeon. Erin had two doctors, and both were kind of hesitant to be put on camera. And I feel for them, because it's hard to look back, and one, it's been so many years. I'm sure their recollection is not that great. I mean, especially the neurosurgeon is somebody who works with Erin for a week or two, not years and years like a therapist. And also, he actually did his job. He obviously repaired Erin's spine in the best possible way, which allowed for this process to take place. But at the same time, it's hard for them to possibly say, well, their projection was wrong, even if they didn't do anything wrong. It was just the ability, to not foresee what was possible.
Right.
And so from, that we just kind of worked out in increments, looking for, the points that we were trying to make. And in the end, we actually had to go get another neurosurgeon to interview, because we needed more context for the field outside of what had been happening to Erin. We needed, questions answered about, why doctors do what they do, how often, how long are they in the rehab for traditionally, and kind of these more substantive points that, are factual. They don't change. And so we have to go find those as well. And we just built out from there.
Wow. I have to say, Dr. Lee didn't look too happy to be on camera. Just an observation.
I think Dr. Lee just didn't look too happy generally. Not that he wasn't happy. He just had one of those faces.
Oh my! Because I was getting the vibe listening to him that he wasn't that pleased. It was almost as if he wasn't that pleased that his former patient was having such a miraculous recovery and making so much progress. It's
interesting that talking to Erin about this, Erin said that as soon as he was able, a little over a year after the injury, he actually made a point of walking into Dr. Lee's office, and he said that Dr. Lee was really happy. But he is one of those people that doesn't necessarily overflow with it doesn't manifest in his face necessarily. But also, I think it's an important thing to say that sometimes the people with the most knowledge are not good communicators.
Right.
And in the art of documentary filmmaking, it's definitely a fine balance between finding the person who was actually, executing whatever it was, or finding someone that knows a lot about that field and is more, magnetic a personality, maybe a better communicator, maybe just a more someone that everyone can relate to a little bit better. And in Dr. Lee's case, that was certainly why we brought on the second neurosurgeon.
Mm-hmm. How long was your editing process? Once you sat down, once you figured out you needed these interviews and the approach that you were going to take, how long was your editing process? Were you editing, bits and pieces as you were accumulating them, or did you wait until you had everything, you had all the moving parts, and then started assembling?
Oh, we definitely started, every time we got new footage, we would filter through it and see what we wanted to keep from it and how it would fit in. But in truth, we probably went through 3 or 4 one-month editing stints where we blocked off a month of our time to sit down and work exclusively on the project during that month. Mm-hmm. And that was spaced out over a period of 3 years. And I think in the end, we did another 2 months close to the finish line. And the reason behind that is just, and I think this is the way most documentary filmmaking ends up working, we wish we could block off 4 or 5 months of our lives to work on the project, especially because Aaron's project is the type of project that if you have the time, you can go get all the moving pieces. You don't actually need to wait, 4 or 5 years for the story to develop. But we didn't have the funds. And so, we make a lot of branded content in the action sports world, and we went about doing the jobs that would allow us to essentially take some of that money and put it into the Aaron Baker, at the time it was called the Aaron Baker Project. Mm-hmm. So I think the answer to your question is maybe there's a total of five months worth of editing and post-production done on the project that's spaced out over the course of 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that was actually changing the structure, deciding it didn't work, changing it again, and then getting actually a second editor with a good fresh pair of eyes that really had a good understanding of dynamic story structure to take a nearly finished piece of work and do that last 5 or 10% that we were at that stage probably unable to do creatively.
Mm-hmm. So, you brought up a good point, Nadia. You mentioned funding. Which is always, especially in the independent film world, is always a challenge, more so with documentaries, and even more so when you get into these very personal documentaries. How challenging was it to get the funding? And you already mentioned that you were taking your own work projects that would allow you to then funnel some money into this.
Yeah, so we had 2 main funding sources for I guess 3 if you consider deferred payments. 2 main funding sources other than that. One was Kickstarter, mm-hmm. and we ran a Kickstarter campaign about 3 years ago, which brought in about $60,000, which we were able to use towards the film. And the other part of the film was self-financed by us, and that was a risk, but we operate a little differently because we're a production company rather than just freelance director or producer. Mm-hmm. And that is, we often look at projects that are meant to be self-financed, and then we're meant to make back our money later. And as this was our first feature film, that was a big risk because we didn't have any experience in the marketplace, and our Rolodex wasn't very thick in terms of people were able to call mm-hmm. to purchase the film or find a distributor or just get the partnerships in place that you need to successfully launch a film. But we still managed, and we were tenacious, and bit by bit we did find those partners, and we're very lucky. And to say that we didn't make a lot of money off of it, but we were able to recover the money that we put into it. And so for us, it's a big win in terms of getting to launch our first feature film and not coming up in the hole with credit card debt and whatnot for it.
Oh. Not in the hole with credit card debt? I don't think I've ever heard a filmmaker say that. Okay. This could be a monumental moment for the two of you. It is an inspiration to indie filmmakers everywhere. Oh, my God. Well,
yeah, It's hard, though, because there's a bottleneck in the funding. You touched on the idea that, it's easier to get funding from granting bodies or foundations if it's a social issue doc.
Mm-hmm.
And even though we, in certain ways are presenting a social issue, particularly in regards to the lack of available resources and care for people who are looking to recover from injury, it's too biographical in nature for it to be considered a social issue.
Yeah.
And so we were definitely blocked out of the institutional funding bodies.
Mm-hmm.
But, there's always another, I shouldn't say there's often another way. And I think we just kept pursuing that and believing in the project and believing that people needed to hear the message, and that in the end we would find a solution to the funding problem.
Well, I'm so glad you did. Unfortunately, we're all out of time, and I got to move on to my next guest, who also they've done a narrative based on a very important legal case. Went to the Supreme Court. I mean, I love talking to you filmmakers who do tackle these tougher issues, be it in narrative, be it in documentary. And, here, telling Erin's story, it is so inspiring for everyone. And with Mother's Day just having been yesterday, I can't think of a better film for a mother and a son or a mother and a daughter to go see together, because I truly don't think Aaron would be where he is without his mom.
Yeah, a really incredible, formidable person who was the mainstay in his support network and has been for his entire life.
Guys, thank you so much. I hope you'll come back on the show again. I want to see more from you. I want to hear more from you. I mean, this has been a real joy having you talking about coming to my senses.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. It's a pleasure, and hopefully we'll have another film soon that we can come and talk about.
Yay! Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Take care.
Have a good one.
And that was DOMINIC GILL and NADIA GILL talking Coming to My Senses. And now they have been very patiently waiting. The wonderful Courtney Balaker and Ted Balaker are now on hand to talk about Little Pink House. Hi, guys. Are you there?
We are.
We're here.
How are you doing? Thanks for having us.
Oh, my God. I am so excited to have the two of you on talking about this. I am very familiar with the Kilo lawsuit and, going all the way up to the Supremes. I spent 27 years in law. And when Kilo hit, that sent shockwaves through the entire legal community. So to see this now in a narrative form with the benefit now, because some years have passed since this whole incident occurred, and went to the Supremes. And as you very nicely point out in your little epilogues with the end titles, a lot of laws have been changed because of what happened with the Kilo case and the Supremes taking away so many of the rights of individual homeowners in these eminent domain situations. How did this film find its way how did this story find its way to the two of you?
Well, Ted and I, we started our own production company about 7 years ago called Courtchilla Productions, and our motto is making important ideas entertaining. And it was brought to our attention that a book was written about the entire saga, called Little Pink House by Jeff Benedict. It's a brilliantly written book. Ted was very familiar with this case. He covered it when he was producing news. I was not. I read the book, and I was completely floored and blown away that this happened. And I was just also completely inspired by Sudekis Kilo, the woman who was at the center of this battle and put her name on the case, and just what she did. So few people, I don't think, either would have done what she did, which is stand up to these incredibly powerful people, these bullies who wanted to kick her and her neighbors out of their homes so that they could hand the land over to a private developer. But she said no. So Ted and I, we just, we thought about it, and we just said, this is a feature film, and it's a narrative feature film. And so we went to meet her, made sure she liked us and was comfortable with how we wanted to make the movie, and then we set off to put the whole thing together.
It's very well, and you wrote this, Courtney, very well put together in terms of, dotting the I's, crossing the T's. And you very smartly, you don't lose the audience with the legal wranglings. And you keep the timeline. We're very cognizant of the timeline. And in that regard, I love the pace of your editing, because the pacing, it's very deliberate and it moves along. You don't vacillate with the pacing, which keeps us in the mindset of actual litigation and how it proceeds, and that, okay, you don't get, it's not a snap decision, it's not a snap this. So we get to see Catherine Keener as Suzette really methodically walking around her house, painting, picking little things up on the table, all very deliberate, very methodical, just like litigation. So that metaphor in there that comes through with the editing is absolutely fabulous.
Oh, thank you so much.
How did you go about, was Suzette involved at all? Did she see the script? I understand she wasn't on set while you were filming, but I'm curious, did she see the script? Did you get her blessing of the script before you went into production?
We asked if she wanted to read it. We invited her to be a part of that, part of the process, and she declined. And I think I understand why.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, she lived through this. Secondly, a book was written about it, so she kind of had to relive it through the writing of the book. And I think that, she didn't want to be involved creatively for two reasons. One, she's never done anything like this. That's not her world. She's a nurse. She describes herself, I'm just a regular person. And she didn't feel qualified or comfortable really weighing in creatively. And secondly, I just think, she didn't really want to have to go through it in that way again. But we showed it to her privately. Ted and I met with her, showed it to her privately before she sat in the theater and watched it with a bunch of strangers. And luckily, she's really, really happy with the film. Now she's become a huge partner in helping us promote the film, do Q&As, just keep the movement moving forward so that we can bring awareness and prevent things like this from happening again.
How difficult was it?
That's been one.
No, go ahead, Ted. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that's been one of the really gratifying parts of the process. Is we've become very close with Suzette and her family, and it's really nice to see someone who is very introverted by nature, as is Suzette, and as Courtney mentioned, she wasn't looking to be in the spotlight, but she sees this as an opportunity to turn really the 10-year ordeal that she and her neighbors went through into something really positive. And you mentioned at the outset, Debbie, that a bunch of laws were changed after the awful Kelo decision. And it's roughly 24 states have really good laws, but that also leaves 24 more that don't.
Yeah.
And so we say that the movie, it's not just a movie, it's a movement. And what we're aiming to do is to finish the job that Suzette and her neighbors started in 2005.
Yeah, it's a shame that more people don't understand about eminent domain and what can happen to you until it actually happens to you, which is something that I really love that you did this as a narrative, because as you know, it's a lot easier to get butts into the seats for a narrative film than with most documentaries. So I think, very wisely, you've got a much bigger audience pool to begin with here by going with a narrative telling of this story. And it is still just as timely now as it was back in 1999 when it all began. And that's a sad commentary on our country and our legal system, but that is the fact of the matter.
Oh, I think you're exactly right. And it's eminent domain abuse is a really strange term. It doesn't really roll off the tongue very easily, but a lot of people may not have heard about it, but it really affects vastly more people than a lot of people realize.
Yeah.
And we've seen that. We've been to so many screenings now where people across the nation have said, this has happened to my house, this happened to my family farm, this happened to our small business. And so it's one of those things that, because it usually strikes people who tend to be poor, they have a hard time getting publicity for it. But there are a lot more people out there than you'll see on the major media outlets. So it happens vastly more than I think the typical American is aware of it happening.
You know, I'm curious. Your casting is impeccable here. Catherine Keener, she is, you just watch her. You are riveted to her, even when she is just sitting. And you mentioned the fact that Suzette, very introverted. Catherine really, really brings that to the forefront. We really feel the introversion, the shyness of Suzette. So what led you to Catherine? And then, you know, and working with her in bringing this story to life?
Well, she's always been one of our favorite actresses. I mean, she's just phenomenal in everything she does, and she's a true artist. I mean, she really takes the craft seriously. I mean, it's not, and she's very much a curator of her career. She only chooses projects that really make sense to her and touch her in a unique way. So, you know, our casting director said, well, let's try for her. And I thought, well, we're never going to get Catherine Keener. But she read the script and she really responded to the material. And then she and I got on the phone for about an hour. I'd never met her before, and we talked. And the thing that struck her so much was just this sense of when you find your spot, when you find your home and root yourself there, and the importance of that. And if someone were to uproot you, just how devastating and quite frankly evil that is to do to somebody when they found their place. And so that really resonated with her. And then in regard to just, you know, the shyness that you just mentioned about Suzette, I mean, she really is a truly humble person. And as Ted was just saying, she wasn't looking for attention. She didn't want to be the face of anything. You see the scene depicted in the film where her lawyers literally have to talk her into doing it. And she did it because she knew it was the right thing to do. And Catherine just really admired, you know, just sort of the humility and somewhat of a stoicism to this woman, and she really connected with that. And, you know, they never met before filming the movie. We tried to make it happen, and logistically it didn't work out. So a lot of people are pretty blown away that for a woman she never met, she just really got her and understood her in a really profound way.
Well, you know, and then you surround Catherine with Jeanne Tripplehorn. She is delicious as Dr. Wells. She
I'm so glad you think so.
She is delicious in that role. You could tell she really, you know, out come the claws, and she dug into that. Similarly, you know, Callum Keith Rennie is perfect counterpart to Catherine Keener, and Colin Cunningham, other side of the coin, which makes him as Billy the perfect, you know, legal playmate with Suzette Kilo. I mean, just fabulous. You know, was it as easy to get everybody else as it was having Catherine come on?
Well, once Catherine was on board, I mean, you know, actors want to work with Catherine Keener because she's got a tremendous reputation as an artist. And so, yeah, I mean, you know, casting the other roles became much easier once she was on board. And Jeanne Tripplehorn, who was just an absolute delight to work with. I mean, a lovely human being, woman. She, you know, we really thought it was important that the role, it wasn't depicted as just this black and white character, like a woman who, you know, maybe had the right intentions in the beginning of it, but then just went down this very wrong and dark path. That, you know, not the mustache twirling villain in the shadows, but rather somebody that used humor and charm and this idea that I'm making the world a better place, trust me. And that was really fascinating to Jeanne, just the complexity of that person and that role.
No, I mean, it really, and that's one of the great things is she's not clear. She's not a cookie cutter villain. There is all that complexity and nuance that Jeanne brings to the role. So on the one hand, you think, okay, maybe she really does believe. But on the other hand, you're watching what's going on and you're like, she's just out for blood. So the ambiguity that she brings it's a wonderful character study to watch her play Dr. Wells. Really interesting. And again, and you know, the guys you have brought in, Colin Cunningham is just, you know, the dumpster diving was great. I got to tell you, the dumpster diving in the rain was great. That really just set the tone.
He's a friend of ours. I love him. I love that guy. I mean, he's up for anything, Colin Cunningham, and he can do just about everything. So I'm so glad you enjoyed him.
Oh my God, he was great. But you know, I've got to ask you about, you know, your cinematographer, Alex Lehman. I know Alex has done a lot of TV, you know, as a camera operator. I loved his work on Piranha 3DD. I kid you not, I have seen it.
All right.
That's awesome.
So to actually see him now do a film like this, wow, that was really refreshing, I got to tell you, because he's very good. He's much better than than some of the projects, you know, in their finished state. You know, he doesn't. He doesn't get the credit.
He really cut his teeth on some of those, you know, horror. I mean, that's actually how I met Alex. I used to be a producer on not Piranha 3DD, but on some other films that production company made. I mean, I met when he was just a camera operator, and it's just been really wonderful to see his career just completely explode and go through the roof. But no, I think he's tremendously talented. You
know, I'm curious, what were the considerations that you and Alex had in developing your visual tonal bandwidth? Because this is a film, it's heavy subject matter, and with a dark theme, you know, litigation theme running underneath it, you know, but you keep the film visually light, except for you know, when we're in the governor's office, or if we're seeing Dr. Wells in in limos or in other areas, and then it gets a little bit darker. So you're almost subliminally, you know, letting us know these are not really good people. I thought that was really interesting, but otherwise you keep everything very light. You really capitalize on having that beautiful waterfront, that river there that was so peaceful, and of course the beautiful shade of the pink house,
right.
And the way that you have it lit with sunlight so that it always looks, it's like a sparkling jewel amidst, you know, what's happening around. So I'm really curious how the two of you came up with this, you know, very beautiful look.
Well, thank you. It was really important to Alex and me to make sure that the home represented the oasis, the peace. This was the place where she wanted to be at the end of her long day and look out at the water. And so anytime we shot the house, we wanted it to feel warm and lived in and solid. And we also wanted to really showcase the difference of these two worlds that were colliding. You know, you had Suzette and the Fort Trumbull neighborhood and this, you know, very blue-collar, working-class reality in juxtaposition with the power brokers. And they were just living in two completely different worlds. And we wanted people to feel that, like, not feel like you're watching two completely different movies, but rather anytime we're with the governor or we're with Charlotte or we're with the power brokers or the heavy hitters, it's a different feel than when we're with Suzette in her living room having those Fort Trumbull neighborhood meetings or, just her, the weight of the reality, what's happening in her life, just crushing down on her. And so, you know, it was the first time Alex and I had worked together in this capacity. I had produced movies he had been a cinematographer on. It was so fun to really just be able to become creative partners on the look and the feel of the film. And we had a lot of options in terms of how we wanted to do it, but we also wanted the film to feel natural. We didn't want to do anything terribly stylized that kind of took people out of the film. Like you say, I mean, it's a tricky piece because there's so much legalese and litigation and so easy for people's eyes to glaze over when watching court proceedings. And so any opportunity we had to make something visually interesting or, make a point visually as opposed to using dialogue or language, we really tried to, take advantage of those opportunities.
And I have to say, some of the interiors in Suzette's house where you have the sunlight, that tiny little fibrous, the way sun is when it comes through the curtains in an afternoon, you really capture that beautifully in the living room interior of Suzette's house. That really, and it just softens everything, and it really carries through with the character of Suzette as being, a softer person, but then we see the real toughness underneath that come out as the film progresses. I mean, all these little touches that you did right down to your costuming, keeping Catherine Keener in the sweaters, the looser fitting clothes, the casual, comfortable in her own skin, as opposed to Jeanne Tripplehorn, who is in the very, very fitted suits with the peplum jackets, and, the power brokers in their gray suits and navy suits. Beautiful contrast all the way through. Every little detail. I don't know how much Ted had to do with any of that, other than just sit there and say, "That's right, that's right, that's right."
Well, a lot of that is just taking off. Suzette is not she's a what you see, what you get kind of woman. She doesn't wear makeup. She dresses, like Catherine was depicted in the film, and same with Dr. Charlotte Wells. So the distinctness between the two women, who in some ways are very similar in that they're very strong women, but in other ways are very different because they come from vastly different worlds. That was, and it's very gratifying to hear you point that out, because that's precisely how these women were in real life. And so it was very important to Courtney and to me and to Alex and to, Catherine and Jeanne to depict as much as possible as it actually happened. And it really was this clash between two worlds. Courtney and I often call them the insiders versus outsiders, and so those are the two different worlds you see depicted in the lighting and the dress and the style of speech and just kind of the power that they're able to project onto this community.
So now the two of you create an interesting dynamic here, working together on this film. Courtney, writer, director, Ted, you're producing. How did this collaboration work, and who had the final word?
Well,
Ted, do you want to tell her that you had the final word?
Oh, we know that's what Ted wants to say. Do we know that?
Well, given it was just Mother's Day, I better step back from this one.
No, it's a great question, because it's always you're kind of rolling the dice when you work with your partner in life, right? But Ted and we've always collaborated really well, and we used to work for and produce for other people for a number of years, and then we just started feeling the pull to want to make stuff that we're really, really passionate about. And luckily we see eye to eye in terms of taste and content. Ted is just, he was so familiar with the case, and his journalism background was just, so important. And he helped me with scenes that were really complicated, and you didn't want to go too far down the rabbit hole with the concepts and ideas that the film is dealing with. And so he was really helpful to me when I was crafting the script to come up with really efficient ways of explaining things that were really long and complicated. In terms of just our company, if there's ever a narrative project, I'm the director of it, because that's my background. And if we do a documentary, and he produces, and if we do a documentary, I produce and Ted directs. And so we just delegate based on what our strengths are.
Okay, so who's done the most directing, Ted or Courtney?
Well, it's really on the basis of I would say in general, Courtney directing the films and among other things. But yeah, as you mentioned, if it's documentary, then I direct, and if it's narrative, she directs. Although there's a lot of cross pollination,
sure.
And so that I think that makes our documentaries better, and it makes our narratives better too. And so it's we've done a lot of difficult things together, from working in network news. She was in directing off-Broadway theater. We moved cross-country. We started a business in the middle of the Great Recession. We make films together. So this was just another. We're used to doing difficult things together, and so it's just sort of normal for us.
Well, unfortunately, guys, we are all out of time for the whole show today. I am so thrilled that I could have you on the show. I hope you'll both come back again. I know you've always got stuff in the works, so I definitely want to see you both come back on the show, if you will.
Oh, we'd love to. Thanks for having us.
Of course, we would love to. You are fantastic. This has just been such a great experience. Thank you for having us.
Oh, my pleasure. So now where can everybody see the Little Pink House?
Well, you can go to watch.littlepinkhousemovie.com.
Mm-hmm.
That's watch.littlepinkhousemovie.com, or just simply littlepinkhousemovie.com. You can see the trailer. You can see where we're going to be up next, and you can actually find out how you can bring Little Pink House to your hometown theater. We've set up a way for fans to do just that, and they're doing it all the way from Omaha to Anchorage to Hawaii to Florida. So littlepinkhousemovie.com.
Yes, and all the small town listeners out there, I can't recommend it highly enough. It might inspire you to, go talk to your own legislators and attorneys and see what you can get done in your towns that are not protected, where the homeowner is not protected, much like what happened with Suzette and the rest of the residents in Fort Trumbull. Guys, thank you again so, so much, and I can't wait to talk to you both again.
Well, thank you so much.
Likewise,
we can't wait
thank
to
you.
get back on.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that was Courtney Balaker and Ted Balaker talking The Little Pink House. That is all the time we have today. So, next week, it's all about book club and Han Solo. So, until next week, I'm Debbie Elias. This is Behind the Lens.